Welcome, everybody. This is the Fall Line with Chaos and Company. And it's been a little while. We've been pretty busy. We went into spring. Angelo was quite busy as we headed into March and April. And then Greenhouse Business was quite busy. So we're finally catching up, getting to say hello, and which is cool. And we want to definitely thank our friends out there and sponsors of the podcast, man, keeping us going here. Blizzard Technica has been absolutely amazing, and we get to get on some of the new anomalies this spring. I know Angelo will probably chat about that at Big Sky and getting on the anomaly. I got on him out here in the East. I know he got a few more days on him. Definitely we're into that season in the summer, the old rollerblade season. I know we got some skate to ski stuff going on out there with rollerblade and Miles Cotter Barrow, and you should look into that stuff and get the cross training going. Everybody's been on the bikes. I know Jeff Stith and the boys were over at the Kingdom Trails in Vermont and had a blast. I couldn't quite go, so they've been harassing me on that. And then, well, you can't do it now because Nick Blaylock's in the summer, but Nick Blaylock over at Nick's Boot Fitting. Make sure you think about that in the fall as you get towards September, October. It's time to get the boots dialed in and go see Nick and help support him as he supported us and keeps this going. But Angelo, it's super good to see you, my friend, my partner. We're back on the air here. It's cool.
It's been too long, bud. And I thought maybe in that hiatus we'd get like notification from the FCC to shut her down, but it never came. So here we are.
It's cool, man. You've been having a busy spring. It's been fun. I remember back in April, you were out at Big Sky, and then they had the National Team Tryout, and first time for you being there and really watching through all that. And so we're going to chat about that. But I kind of want to start from the beginning, man. I've got the Education Development Manager. It's not your first full year because you kind of started last year, sometime near early August, when you were hired on by the national organization of PSIA-AASI. But definitely through your first ski/ride, because it's I want to make sure to include all the disciplines there. I don't want to get in trouble that way. But how's the first winter been for you, and what's going on? I know at times it's been needed a lot of coffee.
Yeah, it's I mean the short answer is it's been great. It's been an honor, right? Who gets to do this? And there are very few people are lucky enough to get to do this, and that is totally not lost on me ever. But that said, it was definitely like jumping into a moving river. And you're right. My start date was right in the beginning of August 2023. Coming up on a full year, but after spring conference, I have seen. And spring conference was first week of May at Keystone. After spring conference concluded, I had seen an entire year's worth of activity. So I've seen a full cycle. It was definitely. Obviously sometimes they're slower than others. That's true, I think, in a lot of jobs. But it was pretty much full throttle from the time it started until really a few weeks after spring conference. It took me a while to settle down, and I had national duties that required travel, and then I'm still Eastern education staff member, so I had Eastern duties that required travel. And all said and done, we just took a family vacation. We just got back from Italy last week, and I think between October and that trip to Italy, I had flown 9 different times. So that's probably not much for some people, but for me, that was a lot. That was the most travel I had ever done in that amount of time. And yeah, it's great because, go to places like Mammoth Mountain or zip up to Killington or Sugarbush to do something, but it's an honor, but it wears on you for sure. It's good to be home for a minute.
It's got to be neat to get out there. I mean, you went out to, I don't know if you hit all 8, but you definitely connected with the leadership and definitely ed staff from all 8 regions we have here in the country. So it's got to be pretty cool to see what everybody's doing in the different regions. And especially at this time where you're coming in this role that we're in a big alignment to have so many things be more similar, even the process, not just our standards. Mm-hmm. So how was it to see all the different zones and ed staff?
It was great. And I didn't ski in every region this year. I don't know if I will or not this upcoming season. What you're referring to with that travel, there was a group of us in the fall who we divvied our travel up and we made sure that each regional education staff training had somebody from this team. It was an ad hoc team. It doesn't exist anymore, but we'll rekindle it in the fall. It's called the Alignment Training Specialists. So it's a core group of people who have been involved with the national alignment process. Josh Fogg from the national team put together basically a training unit that leadership from across the country agreed that should be presented to all ed staff from across the country. And it was grounded in the teaching skills, which we've been referring to as discipline agnostic, because it doesn't matter what gear you slide on. We all use the same teaching fundamentals. So anyway, each region has their ed staff training, and they're scattered so they don't overlap, because there's a lot of back and forth even between education staff. A lot of folks work in more than one region. So anyway, this team of us went and we participated in regional ed staff trainings, and made sure they were all covered, just so people might, had questions on the process, what was going on, that we were there to cover it. So that was quite a bit of travel. And I did get to, I've met a ton of new people, obviously, but it's wild. Like with Facebook, it's Facebook in a lot of ways makes the world pretty small, because you learn about people by reputation, and then all of a sudden you meet them, and then and it's like kind of feels weird because you're familiar with them, but you don't really know them, and you have that weird. There's got to be a word for that probably hasn't been invented yet, but somebody needs to come up with that word, like how you feel like you know somebody because you're connected on Facebook, but you haven't really met them yet. Anyway, I think it's funny when people eye you up after you meet them in that way too, because they're like, wow, you're a lot shorter than I thought. You look much taller in your profile picture. But anyway, so we traveled for that. But then there's also a group of regional representatives from across the country called the Education Leadership Council. And each region has a director of education or some similar title. And in the East, it was Don Herringa, and Don retired, so now it's Carrie Reed. Every region has somebody in an equivalent role to Carrie Reed. That collection of education leaders is called the Education Leadership Council. And then similarly, each region has a CEO. So that collection of executives is called the Executive Leadership Council. Those groups communicate all the time. So like this afternoon, we have a Zoom call with all of that group. So to your question, in January, we had a joint meeting of the ELC and the XLC in Salt Lake City. So that was the first time I had met some of that group, because they're not all involved with education staff. And then, again, we all were at spring conference together, and that basically sets the work tone for the upcoming summer. That's a big meeting. It was held at Keystone. We had all the CEOs, including the national. So we had 9, including Peggy Hiller, and then all the education leaders. And that includes Dave Scholing, Pete Allison's involved in that group. And then all the task force chairs from across the country. And that's mostly made up of national team members. But then all of the national task forces were there at that event as well. So each region has a representative to each task force. And that's where the real logistics happen. That's where the real nitty gritty of the work gets done, in those committees and work groups. So we were all together as a couple hundred people at Keystone in May. And as we all left spring conference, that determines what work needs to be done before it all kicks off again in the fall. And really in the fall, I think the event in my mind that kicks it off is national team training, and that'll be somewhere in October. And then after national team training, we'll all disperse again and go to the regional ed staff trainings, and then that cycle restarts.
Yeah, it never ends, man. It just keeps going.
Yeah, and it's good because there's a lot of work to do, and it's a really, really impressive group of people. So somebody's always got a new idea that's too good to pass up. So yeah, it's it's like a self-perpetuating idea machine. There's a lot of progress that happens. It's more than I thought, and I've been impressed by it over the last year. Yeah.
And we're working really hard as an organization. I know a lot of the training coming out is right now it's based on, how to be better assessors, because we have the new standards. We're going the alignment to get the process the same over the next few years. We've been working on that. Everybody's slowly moving in that direction. And I don't mean slowly in a bad way. It's slowly to make sure we do it right. I mean, it's pretty neat how everything's being worked out to make sure that, when we do have this process nailed down, hopefully it is that it really shows folks their skills. I mean, the process, and I want you to kind of speak to it because you've been involved more heavily on the task force level, which is our disciplines, looking at each thing, how we're evaluating snowboard and telemark and alpine and the adaptive and cross country. But just to kind of chat a little bit about, the organization is doing this to come up with a process that doesn't make it harder or easier. It makes it a process that allows people to show their skills, to show how they apply the fundamentals, and in a time frame that works for both the candidate and the assessors, to make sure we can get the information we need to be fair and really show if they can be level 1, 2, or 3 candidates, whatever they're going for.
Yeah. Everything you said is accurate. And you have to think, like, these regions have evolved independently. They're autonomous organizations that have been evolving since the early 1960s, like 1961. So when you sit down with representatives from each region and you start to look at the exam process in those regions, and obviously there's overlap, there's similarity, because we all use the same national standards. We all assess right now to the same standard. But what's valued in the Pacific Northwest is sometimes different from what's valued in the Eastern U.S. because the conditions are so different, and the demand of not only the instructors, but the student base at the resorts is different. So when you finally sit down and start dissecting these processes that have evolved, one of the reasons it's slow is because you go, damn, that's really cool the way you guys do that. And then you have to sit down and figure out which one is going to be better for 34,000 people across the entire continental US and Alaska and Hawaii if we do exams there. It's a heavy lift, and when you've got all these, and you have to remember too, most of these people are volunteers. So they're typically professionals. They're typically, very, very invested in other full-time careers. So the amount of effort and work they put in for free, just out of their own intrinsic motivation, that you can't lose sight of that, because the organization really runs on volunteers.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting the idea is pretty simple. I think it's easy to say it. It's hard to implement it because of everything I just said. But trying to get our exam process consistent across the country, so just for that purpose, so it's consistent. So if a member in the central region moves or happens to work in Rocky Mountain or works in West part of the year, their messaging, the message they're receiving is similar, is the same, from Minnesota to California, because they're going to go out and deliver a product to a paying student on snow. And that person deserves also that consistency in product. So if you look at somebody like an Eastern skier who travels out West and wants to take a lesson, but someone for my area, for example, who skis at Seven Springs most of the time, but maybe they go out West a couple of times a year. If they want to take a lesson with somebody, they deserve to hear similar content. They shouldn't be contradictory or confusing to them. That's just the basics. So ironing out this process so it's consistent across the country is important. And then trying to figure out one of the conversations is about how much education should occur during an assessment. And it becomes a slow process because a simple question like that, how much clinicking should be done in an exam, when you ask that on the surface, it might seem like an easy answer, but then you start to really pry that apart. And it's like, well, wait a minute, learning mode and performance mode are different. You operate differently when you're learning than you do when you're performing. And, my belief is when you go to an exam, you go there to level up to an assessment, you're there to perform. And a lot of times learning muddies the water. So all of a sudden, are you creating a situation where by introducing learning, now you're lowering somebody's performance level? And in an exam, that's not cool. You can't have that. So those conversations slow down quite a bit when somebody asks a really what appears to be a simple question on the surface, because if you start to think about it, it really is not a simple question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of impressive people working it out though.
Yeah. And it kind of for you culminated at Big Sky for National Academy. I mean, you did all your Eastern stuff, you did your national stuff, flying all over the place for regional training in the fall, and then doing events during the season. And there's a huge amount of prep. I know you were prepping big time. And to get into the National Academy, there's a lot of stuff. You did some pretty cool with you and some other of the educators did some neat alternatives in the afternoon for folks. There was some alignment sessions. And there was also a cool one you were in that I want to know more about. And I'll be bugging Mr. Matt Boyd, but it was you, Matt Boyd, and I believe Ellen Post-Foster did a cool thing on poll use and the creative use of polls or something like that.
Yeah, no, well, I'll come back to that, but just to be clear on that was Ellen's show. Matt and I were just the stunt monkeys. That was Ellen's gig, and it was brilliant. But yeah, Academy is always just great. I think this was my sixth one now, 6 out of 7 years that we didn't have one during 2020. It's an absolute blast. I wish more people looked at it more. I wish more members viewed that as a potential vacation, because you're skiing in one of the best resorts in the country. The weather across the board is great. Like we have had some drizzly days here and there, but man, you're at Big Sky in the spring, and you can't beat that. And then you're there with 600 like-minded people, and you can't beat that. And you're there getting coached by some of the best ski coaches in the world. Like it's an absolute blast. So I had been on the member side of that up until this year. So then being on the other side, like we planned the event, which is it is an unbelievable amount of work to plan that. And most of that falls on our event manager, Laura Duff, who's just terrific. So you have to imagine Laura concurrently was planning for that event. The team selection, which was the following week, it's a different event with different room assignments, different meal, the whole gig. And then we left the national team selection. I was home for about 5 days and flew out to Keystone for spring conference, which is another huge event that she also planned in a completely different state. Yeah. So there are a lot of moving parts. My role primarily with Academy and the planning was working out the electives, because you ski with people who come to Academy ski with a coach for most of the week, but then there are elective events, sessions in the afternoons and whatnot. So I worked really closely with Matt Boyd to put together and Eric Rolls on the snowboard end to put together the electives for Academy. And that was a lot of work. That's busy. A lot of moving parts there, trying to get coaches to cover those sessions. And it's, there are a lot of coaches who come back and run groups at Academy year after year, but there are also people who can't make it. So you've got new people coming in to run groups. And so there's just a lot of moving parts. Then in addition to that, like you mentioned, I was fortunate and honored to run 2 elective sessions at Academy. At Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Pete Allison and I ran a session on alignment. So we were prepping our session, which, it's pretty, standing there in a national uniform running an event at Academy, you want to do a good job, your first time for sure. So we worked on that. And that was fun. It went well. But then you're referring to with Ellen, and I think it was Wednesday afternoon. Matt and I went with Ellen. She did 3 sessions for us this year at Academy. 2 of them were indoor. She did 2 half-day sessions inside, but on Wednesday she wanted to do an on-snow session. So I worked with her, like, what do you want to do? And she wanted to do one, and she put it together. It's called The Many Ways to Use Your Poles to Improve Your Skiing. So, I mean, any chance you get to go with her, right, and just see what she cooked up, just have to do it because it's brilliant. So this is the course description. She had all this stuff planned that she could pull from just based on what the needs of the group were. Because she's planning to adapt to the changing needs of the learner, right? But she basically ran us as a group. There were probably 30 people following her around for a couple hours, having us use our poles in ways that we normally don't do it. So, like, as an example, pole planting twice with the same pole through transition and before fall line. So you have to do 2 pole plants at the top of the turn. And first of all, for people who haven't done a lot of pole, haven't messed around with their poles like that very much, it's a pretty heavy lift. It's a big hurdle to overcome what has become an autonomous pole plant for you. You pole plant once somewhere around the fall line based on how big the turns are, but that's wired in pretty heavily for a lot of folks. When you start to fiddle around with that, things can go haywire. You know what I mean? Like, they can go sideways pretty, like you're all of a sudden you're pole planting with the other hand. You're like, where did that come from? So Ellen is obviously very patient. So she worked through that piece of it first. And then, and that might take a couple of runs, and you're working a 2.5-hour session. Once you get everybody like the right tempo or the right rhythm, then it becomes like purposefully placing it at some point in the turn, which throws a whole new monkey wrench into the works. But once that happens and people's bodies kind of get used to the new movement, and they start to take a breath and think about what's really going on and start to collect some data, get some input, you go, oh, wow, like my turn shape is different. Okay, now we're having an impact on performance. So what's maybe good about the new turn shape? What's a benefit from, it's rounding out the top. I'm not slamming on the brakes at the bottom. Okay, so now you have something you can take back into your normal in quotes skiing. But additionally, if you find that you're starting to slam on the brakes at the bottom of the turn again, you can go back to this activity that Ellen taught you, do 2 pole plants at the top, round out the top, less pressure is building up at the bottom because of that. And then now you can self-coach, And she set that session up like that. And it was obviously brilliant. So here are Matt and I following her around, and she's like, she wanted people to do stuff with 1 pole. So then all of a sudden we have all these poles laying around, and she I don't think she wanted to ask because but we were happy to do it. She's like, do you guys mind carrying the poles? So here's me and Matt, like arms full of pole, run after run. I'm like, Matt, I'm getting cramps in my biceps, dude.
What'd you do at Academy? I had to carry poles for Ellen.
But I'm all ripped up. You should see. I look like Popeye now from that session.
Didn't need your spinach, man. You just had to carry poles. Oh God! But it's fun. And I've heard some good things. I mean, you always hear good things from Academy. Everybody that comes back, that's kind of that time of year. Everybody goes, Capron, you got to go. And I'm like, yeah, I can. If I want to ski next winter, I can't. Yeah. So, but then it leads into the huge event that happens every 4 years for us, unless COVID messes up, which it did a few years ago. Mm-hmm. That the National Team Tryout. It is for all the disciplines. It's a huge gig. I've been through it myself once and know the prep and everybody that goes. I mean, it's incredible, the team that gets picked, and it's amazing the things they can do for us. But everybody that goes to that gets ready, the time they put in and getting out there and doing it, it's pretty impressive. Mm-hmm. I think you probably saw that. I mean, to be there and to be in it or to watch it, it's a pretty impressive thing to see that amount of talent and see what's going on the hill and see how the snow challenges that high level performance, because there's always something that happens. I mean, this year I know it was bulletproof to start. There was also some manky because of the warmth. But it's pretty amazing the level of talent, but then you still see talent raise out of that. It's super impressive. I was super impressed and glad I was able to go and participate once and to watch it happen in person.
Yep.
I'm just curious, you were on the other side. I haven't been on that scorer's side. I was, in it and getting scored and beat down and going, God almighty, I just got my ass kicked right there.
Yeah.
And that happened more often than, that was a great one. But, to see just the performances, to see certain people, I mean, I look back to 2012 and remember runs of some of the other folks that made the team, even some that didn't, just going, wow, that was, and some teaching segments that were just like, that was super impressive. I mean, there's good stuff all around. And to make that team the level it has to be above all that group was amazing to me.
Yeah. I mean, I saw and thought the same thing. And the people skills, the ability to be at that, it's enormously high pressure, not only for the candidates. I mean, they have a certain type of pressure on them, but the selectors, that they take it really, really seriously. You're selecting the group of people who's going to steer in large part our beliefs about snow sports instruction for the next 4 years and represent us to the world at the home court interski in Vail in 2027. So it's taken very seriously. So you mentioned teaching and technical performance, which is off the charts. I mean, the level of skiing and snowboarding is just it's next level, as it should be, Yeah. But the people skills, the ability to be in that pressure cooker and have grace, like go through it with grace, is another really impressive layer. And for that job interview, which is essentially what the selection is, it's not an exam. You're not being scored against the national standard. Like, obviously you have to perform, but it's essentially a job interview, right? To have grace with your people skills through that entire multi-day, 5-day event, that it was really impressive. But so I was there as I was there as a roving selector. We had people who were dedicated selectors, and that's another moment. Like, I don't want to sit here and talk about myself, but like when I was coming up through, and I'm like,
I'm making you.
Well, you remember this, like this purple manual and who the team was during those days. They were like my heroes. Like I'm watching video, like VCR tapes, right? The Dave Merriam and Dee Byrne and all these people, Porter. And then all of a sudden you're working with them as colleagues in this event. It's like, oh my God, I'm having dinner. Like Carol Levine's on one side and Porter's on the other side. And there's Murmur and there's Ellen and there's Ron Kipp. Like it's an honor to be around legends in the profession. But those folks and many others were dedicated selectors. Like they were paired up. They had a particular role. They knew what they were looking at, and they threw scores. Dave Scholing, Jeb Boyd, and I were more in a roving kind of a floating role, and we did throw scores, but we bounced among groups. And I'm watched mostly teaching performance, and I had the great honor of being with. I went with every group except cross country. I didn't have the opportunity to go out with the cross country and watch them teach, but I saw snowboard teach, I saw telemark, I saw alpine, and I spent the day with adaptive and saw those teaches. And it was I mean, imagine you have to go out there and show, you have to improve a group of people who are as good as you, and you're at the highest tier. So and there are people standing there scoring you pencils. It's on. It's fully on. Yeah,
and there's a cool article that Carrie put in the Snow Pro that just came out here in the East, and she tried to let people know, those that went, we have many people that went here from the East, and more don't make it than make it because it's a limited number. Sure. And folks should search them out. The Eastern team that just came back in all the disciplines. I mean, some pretty talented folks that really help raise the bar. I mean, that definitely does. setting the bar. And just because they didn't make the team doesn't mean they stink, man. To get to that level and go there they mean they have some pretty good talent, and it should be celebrated. It was kind of a neat little article to celebrate those that went, because just getting there is a challenge. It's a super challenge to be able to get picked in the East in any region to be able to go. Yeah,
important to remember too that most people don't make it their first try.
No.
So, there are people there and it's their first attempt and they did very, very well and put it on the line, and you can see that the talent is there, and it's going to get to the team level, but it's going to require a little bit more work and probably come into another tryout. And then even when you've made the team, you have to try out again. It's not like you float through the next tryout year. And I'll tell you, like, that is high pressure, because the incumbent team members in those small groups of candidates, all eyes are on them, and they're setting the standard. So there's a lot of pressure on the incumbents. So it doesn't get easier. If you're trying out, you're trying out. If everybody knows you're an incumbent, they're gunning for you.
There's a target on your back, man. They know that you had that spot, but that spot I'm going to try to steal, man. I want that spot. Yeah. So what are the Angelo Ross? Does Angelo have a personal takeaway from, not just the tryout, but kind of the season so far? Like, does Angelo have one for you as the ski teacher? Do you have one as the education development manager? I imagine you probably have a bunch, but
I have a couple that pop into mind. Like personally, my personal goal is as you know, I'm trying to go up through the tele ranks. I'm really enjoying that, and it's a fresh challenge for me, and it is a challenge for sure. But that's kind of my personal development pathway. And as I go through it, reminding myself so that I can remain sympathetic, empathetic with our membership that's going through the certification process as well. It's a good reminder. And you telemark skis have a way of making you eat some humble pie a lot. So it's a good reminder. But I also see, as you watch the best of the best compete for a spot on a team to represent us internationally. I started to see things that I think we need to improve upon. And one of those things is, if you look specifically at our teaching fundamentals, right around in the middle, there's a line that mentions play, experimentation, and exploration. I consider those to be technical terms in that context. And what I didn't see, and this is season long. This is not just, I'm not just talking about the selection. Across the board, I don't see very many people at all structuring their lessons in such a way that you can look at the structure of it and you go, oh, that's based on play, or that's based on experimentation, because they're different. The goals are different. The setup is different. And very well, like, if you're going to turn something into a game, for example, you just can't say, hey, let's play a game. Like, see how many, watch me do my great turns. Like, that's not a game. That's not fun for anybody except the egoist running that lesson, right? But like, if you're going to turn something into a game, it has to have structure. It has to have rules. It has to have a goal. There's got to be challenge. It may be a team thing. It may not be a team thing, but games are structured in a particular way, and they're structured differently from experiments. And experimenting is structured differently from exploration. And that's like systematic exploration, not just throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping something works, but exploring things in a systematic way to find the best outcome. So one of the things that I'm trying to work on this summer, and this has turned into what's now a recurring role on George Thomas's First Chair podcast. We just did our third recording last night, is providing the membership with some ideas on how these things can be structured so that they actually are playful or actually are experimental. And why is that important? Because you want to respect students who arrive at your home resort. You're like, hey, Dave, here's your lesson. What do you want to accomplish today? they're coming to you for that because they don't have it themselves, So there's a responsibility to deliver that. And then when you throw on top of that the exorbitant prices that people pay for lessons, you need to be a marksman when you deliver it. Like they pay too much. The stakes are too high. Vacations are expensive. They're there on a vacation they've saved for and sacrificed for, and they deserve a good product. So we need, as an organization of professionals, to be able to figure out which of those strategies is going to work the best for them and deliver it like a surgeon, and what you're doing. Like it's purposeful. And if it's not any of those three, if somebody's like, hey man, please lecture to me because that's what I really love. I want you to throw your encyclopedia of knowledge at me. If that's what they want, then give it to them. But if it's not working for them because they're like 7,
that's right.
then figure out how to play a game with them, but get them to improve their skill set. And that's where we are. Just we have great fundamentals and technical people in teaching, and our job right now appears is refining that and clearly describing it for the membership so they know how to access that and use it to deliver a great product to their students.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about that fundamental because, it's kind of that, Mr. Shostak will get on us if we say one fundamental is more important than another. Mm-hmm. And we can have our own beliefs on that. But in terms of like, hey, this is definitely it. And this is the organization said this one's more important. I think, then we're stepping out of line because they all should have, they're all there for a reason. But I definitely, as you do, feel that the promote, play, experimentation, exploration is one that if you're using that, it kind of pulls in some of the other fundamentals, not directly, but it does to me. I think when people are challenged in a fun way to try to get some outcome they're searching for, they have a better experience. And I did push that this year. We had at the development team tryout for Alpine, there was one teaching segment that they had to highlight that fundamental. Mm-hmm. All fundamentals were there. It's not like you throw the rest away, but how would you use that? And it was a struggle for some. Mm-hmm. Some thought they needed like 2 days to really go through because they didn't even just look at it as like, well, I'm just going to change speeds. Mm-hmm. Let's do this activity. Can I do it slow? Can I do it fast? What changes? Mm-hmm. Like you were saying before with Ellen's pole plant, when 2 poles, what changed in the turn shape? Well, mm-hmm. What changes if we're doing something fast or slow? Mm-hmm. Short turns, like there's not one radius of a short turn. I mean, there's a range. Like, are you doing it in a 4-foot lane or are you doing it in a 10-foot lane? Mm-hmm. And to me, that was experimenting with the radius, right. Of within a cat track per se. What's a different one? It's a half cat track. And I think that's where you're going. It's like, don't be so creative that the game's so crazy that it's you're doing something with a 7-year-old and they need a PhD in biomechanics to figure it out. Right. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. And you mentioned experimentation and exploration. There's a lot of overlap between those two things. And I think the key difference is in exploration, you can incorporate multiple variables into something that's an exploratory lesson. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to do an actual experiment, an experiment has one variable, right? The one you tweak is called the independent variable. We're going to change this one thing. I'm making this decision and we're going to change this one thing this time. And it may be, let's say, where in the turn you feel you're applying the most pressure, right? Like just out of a hat. But we're going to change that one thing. I want you to apply the most pressure when you're in the fall line. Boom. And then come back the next run or a couple of runs later and say, all right, let's move that point a little bit higher in the turn. Let's move it like 1/3 of the way through the turn instead of half the way and see what happens. You're changing one thing purposely to find a result. The one you change is the independent variable. The result is the dependent variable. And the way I remember that, and I've told students to remember that for years, is the one I change is the independent variable. They both start with I. I change the independent variable. What's going to happen? I don't know. It depends. That's the dependent variable. The result. What's going to happen? I don't know. It depends on that. So that's experimentation. Whereas in exploration, you can incorporate multiple variables. But I wanted to say why those things were chosen. Play, experimentation, and exploration. And they weren't pulled out of a hat. They were chosen very purposefully because as a species, this is how we learn. Mm-hmm. And it's grounded in best practices in learning theory. And you watch a young Homo sapien do its thing. What do? Like as soon as we learn how to crawl, we're exploring, right? And as you get a little bit more refined, you develop cognitively, and we enter school age. It's right around the middle of elementary school that we start putting kids in science classes where they're doing experiments. They start to learn how to take something like exploration and refine it down to, okay, now I'm just looking at this one thing. We're going to see if we do this, what happens, and if we change this, what happens, right? But man, when you end class and you send them out to recess and they start running around, if you watch them on the playground, it might start out in a random way, but most of the time, it very quickly, the process refines itself and things turn into a game. You take a group of kids and give them a ball or give them a piece of sidewalk chalk, and 99 times out of 100, it's going to develop some sort of a structure. Some kid draws a line on the sidewalk, just random event, and then all of a sudden, you got half the group on one side, the other on the other side, and now they're playing some sort of a game with it. That's what our species does. So by incorporating those things into our lessons, we're really tapping into the way we're wired. And that's why it's a best practice. It's rooted in the way our brains work. So if you can incorporate some of that into your teaching purposefully, man, it just way more likely to get good results for your student.
It's kind of like taking pavement, a skateboard, and a sidewalk.
Yeah.
And Angelo and his buddies will figure out something to do.
That's exactly what happens. Skateboarding is a great case study for how things evolve. And it's really funny because like we were talking before we hit record that this, Tony Hawk did the 900 and now there's a kid who just did 3 consecutive 900s on a huge vert ramp, 9-year-old kid spinning on this ramp. It's mind boggling, but I've been skateboarding long enough that you learn about the culture, you learn the history and the stories. I was in that group of kids that started in the mid 80s, but we were not the first group. Like you could argue there were at least 2 other waves that happened before us. And I've seen videos of those guys from the 70s who were our heroes, Tony Alva, Jay Adams, those guys from that age. And I remember a video of Jay Adams, who mostly skated in pools. He said out loud, he's like, what else is there to do? Like, we've done everything. This is as far as skateboarding can progress. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, and you've got that Tony Hawk age group of dudes doing 360s and 540s and ollie 540s, like no-handed 540s out of a half pipe. And Jay Adams and that generation were blown away. But then I'm in that age group with Tony Hawk and those guys. Well, what can you do now? Well, street skaters aren't even riding on the wheels anymore. If you watch modern street skating, they're doing things called dark slides, where you're sliding on the grip tape, or you're sliding on the edge of the board. Do a quarter of a kickflip and land on the edge of the board in motion on a slippery surface and ride the edge and then flip it back down onto the wheels. So like my generation going, you can't progress past this. And then you see that and you're like, oh my God, like what's next?
It never stops, man. It just keeps on going, which is kind of cool.
The point of that tirade was that we do that. We're creative as a species. So if you can find a way to harness those things that we do naturally, in your lessons, and obviously it depends on how much time you have and how much experience you have and your student. It's gotta work for the student. But if you can harness some of that as an educator and bring it into your lessons purposefully, you're gonna deliver a good product.
Yeah. So stuff for the summer. I think folks should think simple, man. Take chunks. I think they look at it, some people are getting ready for stuff in the fall and they kind of want to wait till September. And it's like, dig in there, have some talks, grab a beer, chat about one of the fundamentals. I mean, we're all together, if you're, that we're doing a lot of riding, a lot of us on the bikes. And, I think Jess Stith would say, the biking's the same way. You look at how that's progressed in mountain biking. So it's talk about that, because our fundamentals apply to all of that. It's not just skiing. It's like, how do you apply the teaching parts of our fundamentals? How are we applying our people skills? All that kind of stuff. How do you apply your people skills after 3 beers?
Yeah, that's usually different. You have to adapt to the changing needs of the learner there. I honestly, I think the best way, I think if I heard you right, your question, is it possible in your own brain to make all of this stuff completely non-contrived? Right. And what I mean by that is, instead of thinking about skiing, the act of it, of moving on skis during the summer, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Totally visualize yourself on skis. I do it all the time. But whatever your summer activity is, if it's walking on a bike path, if it's doing gnarly trail runs, if it's the road bike, the mountain bike, like you said, rollerblades, a skateboard, whatever it is, can you forget about the gear and just think about how your body moves? Yeah. And then what happens to me, and I'm sure you get this on the bike, you have a sensation, you get some kind of an input cornering your mountain bike because you've just got the pressure dialed on the outside pedal perfectly, and your inside knee is pointing exactly where you're headed, the apex of the next turn, right at the next berm, and it crosses your mind. It's like, that was a ski turn.
Yeah,
I can't wait to do this on skis now. So that all of a sudden, then it makes the activity less relevant and makes your body and your natural movements more relevant. So I think that's the way to do it, is to see if you can forget about the gear you happen to be on at that time and just think more about like teaching your body how to move, and teaching lessons. I mean, if you have kids in the house or grandkids, they're constantly doing stuff that you need to reteach, putting their shoes somewhere they don't really leave stuff in the sink. You have to get into your patient mindset and reteach that. That process of teaching some kid to put shoes away is no different than teaching somebody how to do something on skis or a snowboard. So if you can give yourself those reminders, and then people skills, there's no shortage of opportunity to practice that. Like, you can do these things all year, and it just, I happen to be on skis right now. I happen to be on a trail run right now. Doesn't matter. The mode of it becomes less and less relevant, and what takes its place is, like, how your body's going to work.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's always good to chat again. It's about time. It's been a while. We're going to try to do some things. We're definitely in a different busy season with the summer, but Angelo and I are going to try to put together a few things. We have a few people hopefully we can line up over the next 2 months, July and August, before we get into our big push. I mean, we always get into our push in the fall. We want to podcast like crazy because we get everyone starting to think skiing and that, but we have a few things hopefully we can line up for the summer and try to keep things going. I know a few people out there asking, like, where's the next episode? Well, here's this one here, kind of reflections on the season and thoughts for the summer, and we'll keep it going. Plus, Angelo and I just love to get together and chat. That's where the podcast lives, man. If we can't get together and chat, man, what do we first started and said, well, if no one listens, at least we get to talk to each other.
Right. That's what happened, right?
Yeah.
There's a pandemic anyway. We're on Zoom calls anyway.
Right. And it's pretty cool, man. There's so much stuff out there. I hope we can help promote it and push it too, because it's just great, the amount of stuff. I mean, I know you're doing some stuff with George Thomas, really putting some educational piece. You kind of doing a recurring thing, which is kind of neat. And George is still doing his quick hitters with a lot of different folks in the organization. Stacy's out there doing her tea talks. There's some cool stuff out there. Tom Jelly's doing some great podcasts. The folks he's talking to and the stuff he's talking about is really neat. And there's just a lot of info people can jump on and enjoy and keep the stoke going. Because I mean, I think Tom's really going nuts because they're skiing down in New Zealand, all that kind of stuff. So they're like in ski season. We're in like summer season. Would we hit last week 100?
Oh, it's a burner here. And let me add to that too, that like there's always opportunity for members to get involved with their region. So, ring up the regional office and introduce yourself and say, hey, I'd like to help out. See how you can participate. Like, for as much as we all love what we do in the couple of short winter months, like, you can engage with some of that vibe in the summer by getting involved with your region. So feel free to do that. There's plenty of work to do.
Yes, there is. So thanks everybody. And we're going to thank our friends again. It's super great to be connected with the Blizzard Technica. It's a great group and things look really great there to the relationship to make some things happen.
We didn't talk about that. Actually, remember I did have an opportunity to get on the new Anomaly 88 at Big Sky, and man, it was all it was talked up to be. It's similar to the Brahma 88. It's got more rocker, it's a little lighter, and holy cow, it was a terrific ski. So somebody's looking for gear next year, tele or adaptive or alpine. If you're running on alpine shaped skis, like consider checking out the new Anomaly line. It's really, really fun.
I mean, you and I have been talking. It's like we want to have the 88, the 84 on telly. Oh God, we want that on alpine too. It's like, dude, how many skis we're gonna have? We're gonna have to beg. We're gonna have to beg because it's like
it would be irresponsible of us to not ski all of them.
Oh, I think about the 84 and what that brings, and I'm like, man, I could really love that. And these snowstorms, and then it's like the 88. Oh, and then it's like I want it both alpine and telly. Then you get the 92 here, the green one behind me. When we get into some really gnarly stuff and some deeper snow, and I'm like, oh my God, and that's only 3 out of the 4 in the line. It's like, holy God. Yeah. And they were fun. I got on them a few times in some spring snow here in the East. And it was like, I was psyched to get on them and play with them because they are definitely what they were made out to be, which is pretty cool.
They look so nice with that orange boot. And then you can run the boots up the neck and get them dialed in. Like it just makes sense.
Yeah. And it's get up there and find out what you should be in for a boot too. It's, so many folks try to get into a boot or get a boot, and then they go see Nick or those guys to get boot fitted. It's like, this one's really not the right model for the shape of your foot. So it's good to hit those guys up, hit Nick up and see what you need to be in for you.
Yep.
And every boot line has some good stuff. Technica has some great different shapes and sizes and obviously sizes, but the widths, different shapes, different widths to be able to fit different people, different genres of skiing, the backcountry stuff, the 0G stuff, the hustle and all that kind of stuff. There's a ton of different stuff, boots and skis.
Yeah. It's the whole industry is a buyer's market. There's so much good stuff,
Yeah, it's crazy. Yep. All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for all the support for the podcast. Angelo and I love it. We love chatting with you. Love that you're enjoying it. And hopefully we'll chat again real soon. Thanks everybody. This has been The Fall Line with Chaos and Company.